Hey everyone, I'm Ashley and I've lived alone for the last 18 years. Yes, very long time. And usually when I tell people this, I get the same few reactions. Do you ever get bored? Do you get lonely? Or how? Do you like it? Like why? Or I could never. And I think sometimes there's this misconception that living alone means being isolated, disconnected, lonely, or it means something went wrong in life. But in my opinion, at least in my life, living alone has been one of the most healing, empowering, and transformative decisions and choices I've ever made in my entire life. And in this video, I'm going to share more about that. But first, if you're new here, I'm Ashley Bendixson. I am a nationally touring speaker as a subject matter expert in abuse prevention and trauma resilience, and I'm also a survivor. And I try to use this channel to the best of my ability to share content and share advice. I want to get in a better groove of that, but if anything that I do interests you, by all means, poke around, give the page a follow, and that'll certainly inspire me to create more. So let's get into today's video. So I've been living alone for 18 years, as I've mentioned, and to be perfectly transparent, for just 1 out of those 18 years, I did live with a roommate. It was my partner at the time. It was a very serious relationship. It was an obvious step in our relationship. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, and that was that. Had nothing to do with like cohabitating. But other than that, for 17 out of 18 years, I have lived alone. No roommates, never with my siblings, no one. It's just been me. I've had many apartments on my own. But in order to understand that and why I started living alone, let me tell you a little bit about my backstory. So I started living alone after a breakup with an abusive ex-partner. So when I first started living by myself, it was not in an empowering way at all. It really was just about survival. I needed privacy, anonymity, a space that, an address that he was not aware of. And that's really all it was at the time. But with each passing day, it quickly became obvious that it was a huge part of my healing and kind of what I needed to begin reclaiming my life. Because I think in a lot of ways, I felt safe. I felt protected physically, but also emotionally. I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't holding my breath. I could breathe. I didn't have to worry about, making decisions and complying with my partner's needs, moods, or preferences. I could just take a deep breath and kind of be on my own without being watched or judged or controlled. And I was spending really valuable time with myself, which was a huge piece of me rebuilding my identity. In the world of healing, especially after trauma, there's different phases and stages that help a person to heal. And I think the two that really came from me living alone is one, creating safety and stability, right? Physically and emotionally, and also reclaiming my identity and my sense of self. And so now when I look back at the last nearly 2 decades of living alone, I can see very clearly how living alone supported my healing. And I'm going to share kind of the 5 ways that really stand out to me. So number 1 is living alone as a means of reforming or discovering your identity. Often when you are in a traumatic relationship, an abusive relationship, it's so controlled that you lose your own sense of self, who you are. But by contrast, living alone, you have a chance to redevelop what that is. I know for me, living alone meant that I could just live without an audience, right? Live without having to make choices based on other people's needs and wants. I learned who I am when no one's around, and that brings a rare kind of clarity. When you're not adjusting constantly to other people's needs, you learn, how you actually like to spend your time, what makes you feel grounded and at peace, what your natural rhythms are, what you value, what makes you feel alive and energized, how you like to spend your time, right? What you like your days to be like. You learn so much about who you uniquely are and what works for you by spending that valuable time living alone and discovering it. I think there's just something incredibly powerful about living in a space that just reflects you. Today, I can undoubtedly say that I know myself extremely well. I know what I need. I know what works for me. I know what schedule works best. I know my natural rhythms. I know myself in a way that I did not know before. And that has come from that intentional spending time alone. Number two is seeing that solitude is a gift. Solitude is a really beautiful thing. And we need to differentiate the difference between solitude and isolation. Sometimes people think solitude means being lonely, but these two are not the same thing. Solitude is being connected to yourself, and isolation is being disconnected from others, right? So, two very different things. And solitude can honestly be really, really nourishing. This isn't just my opinion or my experience. There's also a ton of research on just the value of kind of spending time alone, where you go within, you find peace within your inner world. You know, prior to this chapter of my life and kind of rebuilding, I really did not like time with myself. I did not like me at all. You know, I was constantly in my head. I was trying to distract myself, but by embracing this new level of solitude, you know, I was able to build emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, practice self care, and really just kind of enjoy my own company. You know, I can look back at that first apartment that I had and vividly remember moments where I was just kind of relaxed and grounded and calm and just with myself and thinking, like, I actually like my own company. This is kind of nice. And so, you know, when you do this, you start to value your alone time, that solo time, and that becomes really powerful because then you're a bit more particular about who you let into your life, how you let people into your life, and you're able to kind of protect your peace even more because you know what you need in order to thrive because of the time you spent on your own. And that kind of brings me into this third point that living alone is really good for regulating your nervous system, right? Big topics. Everybody's talking about nervous system regulation. But if you've experienced any type of trauma or relationship trauma in particular, your nervous system needs consistency, stability, predictability in order to feel calm. Healing comes from predictability and having a consistent routine. So, you know, what might predictability look like living on your own? Well, you can control all the elements. You can control the lighting, the smells, the sounds, the volume, the emotional tone of where you live. And this can help you achieve things like quiet mornings, safe, quiet evenings, eating at the same times, having routines for yourself that feel really grounding and keep your body in a calm emotional state versus maybe coming home to a place that's loud or chaotic or someone wants to talk or you go in the fridge and something you left there is not there anymore and it can just feel really stressful. Instead, living alone, you can create a very stress-free environment through all of these little kind of details. You know, for me, when I look back at that first apartment, instantly I loved candles and I loved music and I would come home every day, light the candles, put some music on. It felt calming and grounding, and it really helped me. I struggled with a lot of anxiety and panic attacks in the beginning, and so these things helped me just to kind of like get into a Zen mode. And to this day, I'm still really big into candles and incense and mood music and low lighting. I mean, this is like literally the first thing I do when I come in at the end of the day. And all of these things will look different for you versus what they look like for me, but they're really instrumental in building that sense of inner safety and inner calm. And they also create what I just mentioned, predictability and consistency, which are really a huge piece of healing. Number 4, living alone also helps you rebuild a sense of boundaries. Again, you are learning what you need most. And especially after a breakup or a relationship ends for whatever reason, sometimes you don't always know your boundaries. And for me, being on my own, I learned my boundaries real quick and they began to matter so much to me that I learned to express and communicate them to other people. So for you, this might look like, you know, learning how much alone time you need, what overstimulation feels like, what energizes you and what drains your energy, what helps you protect your peace and what makes you feel like your peace is being threatened. And when you know those things about yourself, it's much easier to recognize when someone or something is disrupting that internal peace or that internal sense of just groundedness and being calm. And it also helps you to realize who aligns with that. So in relationships, you become a much more empowered individual. Yes, you're building independence living alone, but it also teaches you how to build healthy interdependence on other people, choosing who you let in, how you let them in, when you let them in. And this is a really empowering benefit. And number 5, this one's a little bit more intangible, but you learn that you have the ability to always return home to yourself. Sometimes when we talk about living alone, we're thinking about the physical space, right? The 4 walls or however many walls. But living alone is really about finding home within and knowing that no matter what happens in life, no matter where you end up, what challenges come your way, what traumas or relationship issues come your way, you have developed the skills to return home to you. You know how to define what you need. You know what feels good. You can create this no matter where you are physically. And to me, that is a gift, to know how to find home within you, that living alone is not about the physical home, it's about the internal home. And that is such a powerful act of reclaiming your life and having agency and autonomy to live the life that you want. Hey everyone, so a very quick, very important addition to this video as I'm now editing it. So while I didn't necessarily create this video for survivors of abuse, I do want to take a moment just to talk about the financial challenges of leaving an abusive relationship. So it is not that easy just to leave an abusive partner and go and start renting your own place. In fact, financial abuse is present in the majority of abusive relationships in some way, shape, or form. And so for many, leaving and finding their own place is a financial challenge. But there are resources available in every community. Very few people realize that most domestic violence agencies are not just shelters. They provide tons of free transitional supports, and that includes free counseling, for one, but also they have things like transitional housing, where they will rent an apartment to you that they own. Many of them will help with things like housing assistance, where they help you with housing applications and paperwork. And many others also have financial resources where they can provide first, last, and security to help get you into your new safe home. So I wanted to make sure I shared that. I didn't want to dismiss or overlook the very real financial barriers that exist for victims and survivors of abuse. But I wanted to make sure I shared that there are resources available. So that really just starts by looking up, Googling, searching for your local domestic violence agency, asking what resources they have. And if they don't have any, they often are kind of those middle individuals who know of those resources in the community, and they will point you to the right supports. Okay, back to the video. Now, I can't make this video without addressing some of those practical things that come up. There's a lot of questions, fears, concerns. So let me just quickly go over the 4 that I think are probably the most common, or at least they're the ones that I hear the most often. Number 1, the fear of being lonely. Sure, loneliness may pop up every once in a while, especially in those early days. If it's after a breakup, if you just lived with this person, it can feel lonely at times. You might want to quickly turn to someone and share something funny you just saw, or come home after a long day and talk to someone. But in my opinion, being lonely has nothing to do with whether you have roommates or not. Your sense of fulfillment should never rely on having people physically present and near you. I think that, loneliness is more a product of disconnection, being disconnected from others, not having meaningful connections. So I have rarely felt lonely at all, like ever. I mean, honestly, even during like the pandemic, I didn't feel lonely because I had so many meaningful connections. People I could call, my work was very meaningful, my work is meaningful. I've always volunteered, been involved in my community, and engaged in the worlds that feel really deeply connected. So for me, coming home has always felt like this beautiful way to unwind versus having to come home and get wound up around other people. So if you are living alone and you ever feel lonely, this is not necessarily your fate or a sentence because you've chosen to live by yourself. It's just a signal that you need to build some meaningful connections, and it's asking yourself what that might look like for you. The second big fear that comes up is getting bored. Personally, I've never been bored. I feel like I have so many hobbies and interests, but that truly is a product of me spending all this time alone. I think that when you spend time by yourself, it forces you to be curious about who you are, what your interests are, what your passions are, what hobbies you might want to build into your life. And then again, it's being intentional, it's being active and going and pursuing a hobby. So, my first apartment, I was really into records. I didn't have much money or resources or anything. I was in dire straits financially, but I had a record player and I would go to the thrift stores and I would collect records and I would go home and just enjoy music. And now, I've got some ukuleles, I've got a keyboard. For a while I went through a little art phase where I bought all these art supplies. I was making cards. I read books, I journal, I have so many hobbies. And so boredom again is just a sign that maybe you need to do something different in your life. Maybe your life has just gotten a little stagnant. And you can be bored even with a roommate, even living with a partner. So, boredom is just about course correcting for yourself. And what I do believe is that when you live alone, boredom becomes less likely because you have all of this kind of alone time to self-explore, self-discover, think, reflect, make decisions, curate your life. The third big fear that I hear often is just how much responsibility it takes to live alone. Yes, you are responsible for everything. The finances, the bills, the utilities, taking out the trash, maintenance, fixing things that break. And it can be a lot and it can be stressful at times, especially the financial piece. But I think just on a regular basis, knowing like, okay, something just broke. I'm going to look up a YouTube video. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to ask for help. I'll talk to the landlord if I can't figure it out. You start to build self-reliance. You start to realize that you can do hard things, that if problems come your way, you can solve them. And what this gives you over time is confidence. It might not always be fun, but you really start to learn that you can handle life on your own. I've never once doubted my abilities to be able to navigate life on my own because I've done so much on my own. And for many people, that's a really powerful identity shift, a powerful internal shift to realize like, I can do it. Whatever comes my way, I can figure it out. And last but certainly not least is the fear of just being safe. Safety is a real and valid thing to have concerns and consider when living alone. And I think for me, I would reframe it as, safety is really less about, fear and feeling safe and more so about awareness, readiness, preparedness, and agency, right? Taking action to make sure that you feel safe or have things in place that, feel comfortable for you. I think if I had to think about the level of safety that I'm in living alone, I can't say that this is any less safe than me walking to my car at night after going grocery shopping. But what I've learned about living on my own is to be really aware of my surroundings, to be really alert. When I am walking home alone at night, when I'm walking in the door, making sure no one's too close or walking behind me, just being really strategic and alert. I always have my entryway light on. It's in my hallway kind of stairwell that comes up to my apartment. And all night long, I leave the light on. It's just something that makes me feel better and more secure by having the light on. You can get Ring cameras, you can get security systems. If you live in an apartment building, there's other people in the building you can maybe turn to if you feel unsafe about something. Maybe you have friends and you have check-in systems by the time you get home. So there's a lot of things that you can do. But I think kind of like counterintuitive and maybe something I didn't expect is that because I've spent so much time alone and done life on my own, I actually feel less unsafe because I feel so safe in my body because of my sense of agency and autonomy. Like I feel grounded in myself, I feel aware. These are things I built from living alone. So even though there might be safety concerns in the world, I feel like within me, I physically feel safe. And that comes from everything we've talked about, the knowing myself, paying attention, setting boundaries, being alert, regulating my nervous system. I've learned to feel really safe regardless of my living environment or whether I have roommates or not. And with that, I think that's a really good place to kind of sum up this video. So not only have I grown as a person, not only can you grow as a person, but I think that living alone is just immensely joyful. It is a lower stress way of living. It's an empowering way of living. And I have gained just so much from it. You find quiet mornings, your own rhythm, a home that reflects who you are and your unique personality. You can have little corners for creative moments, for healing, for rejuvenation. You can have lazy days without judgment. On a more like nerdy practical side, you know where everything is. You know where you left something. You know what's in your fridge. When you're coming home and you're going to make dinner, you know what's in there and you know it's going to be there, not that someone else ate it, right? Like there's just so many little things, and it might sound a little neurotic, right? But you have this like sense of order to living alone that again supports the predictability and the consistency, and it's just a very low stress life to kind of be in control of your surroundings and your environment, which in turn supports your internal environment, your inner sense of self and well-being. But I think for me, the probably biggest takeaway of all is that my home feels like a sanctuary. It feels like a safe space. That's what my first apartment represented for me, and it's what my home still represents for me today, a safe space. And what I've also learned is that, as I mentioned in one of my points earlier, I can always come home to myself no matter what comes my way. Whether I'm living here or someday living with someone else, now I've got all the things to create home within me. All right, that's all for this video. Thanks for listening. I hope it made sense. It was a lot for me to kind of get all my thoughts onto paper and articulate this, but I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you live alone? Are you considering living alone? Have you ever lived alone? What questions do you still have? What benefits have you found? What challenges have you found? I'd love to keep this conversation going in the comments. Otherwise, if that's it, I'm Ashley, and I will see you again real soon in the next one.